Okay, it's 12 o'clock Central European Time, Paris time. So we should start this meeting of this joint meeting between the French Club des Régulateurs, and the OECD Network of Economic Regulators. Once again, I would like to thank the regulatory policy division within the Directorate for Public Governance at the OECD, and especially Martha Baxter for helping us to organize those events. And I want to thank on the side of the chair. Governance and Regulation, the Club des Régulateurs, Marie-Hélène Kaiti-Colli. So let's start. So just before we start on the content, some reminder of the rules for those online events. So we ask the attendants to switch off their camera and their microphone to avoid any problem during the conference. And if you have questions, please use the chat to raise your questions, and we'll summarize them and convey them to the panelists. I'd like to thank, of course, all the panelists, and also the two chair of the two roundtables that will be held this morning, and that symbolize very well the cooperation between the Club des Régulateurs and the Network of Economic Regulators, because the first panel will be chaired by Anne-Yvonne Billon, with the president of the Network of Economic Regulators, and the second panel will be chaired by Dominique Jam, with the president of the Club des Régulateurs. So let's start now. So basically, just to remind the topic of the day, which is equipping agile regulators. And regulators oversee sectors that are constantly evolving for at least three reasons, plus the fourth one. The first one is, of course, innovation and new technologies, especially digital technologies that have enabled the development of new products, new services, and new business models that have a profound impact on markets. Second, there are major global challenges, and in particular, the climate change and the resulting economic transition, necessary to ensure sustainable growth and development, which affects sector equilibria and trigger major waves of investment and innovation. Third, of course, we are also experiencing exogenous shock, if I may say so, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, or more recently, the energy crisis linked to the war in Ukraine. Those crises challenge the resilience of operators and of the governments to deliver essential services. And there is a fourth one, in a sense, because, of course, beyond the need of more agility by the regulator to address these challenges, there is also a need of enhanced ability to react to this challenge by the legislator and by the government, which might result into further capabilities of demand for further capabilities of regulator to coordinate with the government and the legislator to contribute to the design of regulation and to the implementation of innovative policies. So regulators' agility is essential, and regulators' agility is in responding to evolving demand can be strongly influenced by the way they receive and manage their resource. Second, moreover, delivering will require adequate resource, both in terms of volume and skills. I'm thinking in particular to capabilities in data science, for instance. Reorganization of their operation can also be on the agenda of regulators, especially when they are in charge of new responsibilities. But there is also an important dimension, which is since many challenges are transversal. For instance, think to the access at large scale to data, to large scale data, and to the analysis of those operational data. And these frontiers among sectors might also be challenged by users, practices on new business models. Think of intermodal mobility, for instance. Regulators have an increasing need to cooperate both across sectors and across jurisdiction. So building on the OECD report equipping agile and autonomous regulators, this seminar will discuss the way in which resource support agile regulators that can keep up market development, technological changes, and evolving mandates. So the session will be organized around 2 roundtables. As I mentioned before, was the first one chaired by Annie Brand-Billon, and the second one by Dominique Jam. But before then, we will start by a talk by Vincent Van Langen from the OECD. We'll present this report on equipping agile and autonomous regulators. So Vincent will take 10 minutes to present this report, and then we will have 10 minutes of interaction, both with the panelists and with the audience. So thank you very much, and Vincent, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric, and I'm very happy to join this session today and to kick off the session with the first presentation. My name is Vincent Van Lange, and I work at the OECD Regulatory Policy Division, where I support the work of the Network of Economic Regulators, which is a network that brings together around 70 economic regulators across sectors and countries, where we discuss the governance and performance of economic regulators. Now, I will try to share my screen with everyone. I hope everyone is able to see the slides right now. So,
yes, perfect.
Perfect, thank you very much. So, as Eric also already mentioned, at the basis of the conference that we also organized together with Université Dauphine is the Equipping Agile and Autonomous Regulators report. It's a report that we launched in September 2022. And it's a report where we specifically focus on the resources of economic regulators. So that can be the financial resources, human resources. And the reason why we developed this report together with our network of economic regulators is that we've seen that by analyzing the governance of regulators, we also saw that resources play a crucial part in that and can have quite strong implications for the work of economic regulators. So that's why we designed a survey to collect data on the resources. And we've conducted that among our delegates of the network of economic regulators, and we had responses from 57 regulators across 31 countries. And following that survey, we also discussed findings from the survey together with our delegates to really understand together what those findings really mean for the work of economic regulators. So what do resourcing arrangements, how can they affect the work of economic regulators? Now, in the report, we analyzed the impact of resources across a number of different dimensions. So the impact of resources, we not only look at what are just the trends in resourcing arrangements, but we try to understand what do trends in resourcing arrangements, how do they translate into, first of all, their autonomy and agility. Second of all, how can resourcing arrangements really bolster the accountability and transparency of regulatory systems? And also, how can resourcing arrangements affect the ability and capacity of economic regulators to do their work? And finally, also, given the timing of the survey, which was in early 21, we also looked at the impact of COVID-19 on the resources of economic regulators. Now, today's focus, we won't discuss all 4 different pillars, but we try to focus really on the findings related to agility and how resources can really support the agility of economic regulators. Now, why that's so important, I think Eric also already mentioned it in his first introduction to the session, is that regulators are overseeing sectors that are more and more dynamic, where we see many different trends at the same time. Just look at, for example, the energy sectors, where we see not only new modes of energy, consumers become producers, and we see complete different market structures from what we're used to, different market dynamics. And that also means that, of course, regulators have to change the way that they do their work. On top of that, of course, more recently, we've also seen a number of crises that came on top of that, such as COVID-19, the energy crisis. And this really creates a need for regulators to also become more agile. And the OECD has also developed a recommendation on agile governance to harness innovation, which really tries to help governments, regulators to make sure that regulations that they develop, it's not rigid, but it's agile and it's future-proof, so that it doesn't just take into account today's realities, but also tomorrow's. And as I will show throughout the rest of my presentation, is that also resources can really play a crucial role in making sure that regulators can be that agile player to really respond to new developments in the sector and foresee new developments in the sector. And on this slide, I've also included 4 different angles, which shows how resources can really bolster that agility of economic regulators. Now, I won't go into them right now because I will dedicate 1 slide each to each of these pillars. So if we first move to the first part, if we look at the resources of economic regulators, of course, one crucial part is their human resources. And in response to new developments in the markets, they also need to be agile to be able to bring in new skills, recruit new staff, to respond to new challenges. And one important aspect that we saw through the survey and that we also discussed in the report is their how quickly they can recruit new staff. And we see that for 29% of economic regulators, there is a need to obtain approval before they can hire staff for new positions within the organization. And that approval is usually from a ministerial body. And that's, of course, can affect the agility of regulators to respond to new challenges, especially in cases where either staff numbers are restricted below what's really necessary for the organization, or when staff positions cannot be filled in a timely fashion. And as we see also across more other public bodies in general, especially difficulties for regulators are there in the field of more digital skills, so IT and data skills, as Erik also mentioned before. Second, looking at the agility, of course, agility isn't only looking at the human resources. It isn't only to recruit new staff in response to new challenges, but it's also to ensure that the staff that's already there at the regulator is able to adjust their ways of working, to develop new skills, develop new knowledge, to be able to keep up with changes in the sector, to make sure that they can really understand new developments, but also to bring in new, fresh perspectives into the organization to do their work. And what the report finds here is that 86% of economic regulators do allow their staff also to obtain external qualifications by giving them also financial support to do so. And additionally, also quite a lot of regulators engage in the exchange of staff with other bodies. So we see that 44% of regulators exchange staff at the domestic level, and 41% of regulators also exchange staff internationally with other bodies. And all these measures can, of course, ensure that the staff at the regulator is able to develop those new skills and knowledge. Thirdly, if we now change our perspective towards the financial resources of regulators, we see that there's a number of aspects in the resources of regulators that can affect the predictability and stability of resources. And as such, it can also affect the agility. And that may sound like a paradox, but of course, agility is not just the flexibility of regulators and to respond, but it's also the ability of regulators to foresee what's coming up ahead. And therefore, there's also a need to be able to make long-term plans, to really plan ahead, and predictability and stability of resources can also be a factor that can enable them to do so. What we see here is a few findings. We see that 90% of regulators have annual budget appropriations, so relatively short-term budget appropriations. However, for 28% of regulators, we see that those budget appropriations, which have already been approved, can still change during the year. And that can, of course, negatively affect the predictability and stability for regulators to do their work effectively. Furthermore, we see that 89% of regulators face restrictions to carry over funds between financial cycles, which can allow them to smooth revenues across time. And finally, for those regulators that are funded through fees, we see that 80% of them have a cost recovery mechanism, and that can allow them to facilitate a process where budgets really match the costs of the regulators, and fees ensure that the regulator is sufficiently funded. Of course, with all these points, it's also important to consider that there can be additional safeguards, such as clear criteria or procedures for budget revision, the use of multi-annual forecasts that can also affect the predictability and stability of resources of regulators. Now, looking at the final dimension, we also see that in the financial management of economic regulators, there are differences between regulators in how much autonomy they have to manage their own financial resources. We see that as public bodies all tend to do, economic regulators do need to follow general rules on public spending, on procurement. But we see that for 53% of regulators, there may also be additional restrictions on their spending, such as, for example, spending caps on specific cost categories. And that can affect, of course, the agility and ability of regulators to reorganize themselves in light of new changes in the sector, and also to respond to those new developments. Interestingly, for this point, we see this less often for regulators overseeing multiple sectors, so-called multi-sector regulators, as compared to regulators overseeing single sectors. Now, these are just 4 different findings I wanted to highlight for this presentation and to just kick off the discussions of today. Of course, I also welcome everyone to have a look at the full report and the different dimensions that are being discussed there, which I've also shared a link on the slide. And for now, I would just like to thank you all and welcome any question, of course, that you may have. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And if there is any question among the panelists, which are already online with a camera and their microphones that could be activated. If not, I have a first question. So, Vincent, during your survey, of course, it was a survey, so it's a questionnaire, etc. But you have a lot of exchange with the regulators. Did the regulators? I mentioned in my introduction, and you also mentioned that the need for specific skills in IT and especially in data science. And did the regulators you surveyed mention any problem of in hiring those specific skills? Because on the one hand, on many job market, there is a kind of shortage of supply of those specialists, and on the other hand, in addition, not on the other hand, it results into very high remuneration for those guys. And so, of course, it has an impact on the ability of regulators to pay wages that are competitive on the job market. So, do you have any feedback on this?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And yes, we definitely do see that with the survey and also with our interactions with the regulators. So, as part of the survey that we conducted, we first asked, are you facing difficulties in recruiting enough staff to fill all positions at the regulators? Most regulators say that for a majority of positions, they are able to recruit staff, but for certain positions, it's more difficult. And one specific area that was mentioned quite frequently was indeed data and digital skills. Yeah, it's not surprising, of course, because other public bodies are looking for them. In the regulated sector, companies are also looking for them. And yeah, like the remuneration is an important aspect in that, because also in the report we look at the remuneration of regulators.
Mhm.
And we do see that I think it's about 3/4 of them have to follow government remuneration policy, which, yeah, of course, also will in some way restrict them in offering the salaries that may be competitive. And we did also see some correlations between the ability to match salaries in the sector and the ability to follow government remuneration policies. And yeah, in some sectors that's more significant than in others. So, for example, for energy regulators and e-communications regulators, we saw quite, more difficulties, and more often that regulators are not able to match salaries that, well, could make them competitive with the regulated sector. But yeah, IT and data skills are also a significant area that I mentioned there.
Yeah, thank you. And in your exchange with the regulators, did you identify any strategies that the regulators might follow to try to address this issue? For instance, cooperating in developing common capabilities, so that, I mean, basically to bypass some of the constraints they might have, and also to reach simply the critical mass, and also to address the issue that basically collecting data on new business models that affect different industries in the same time might result into economies of scope for the regulators. Did you identify any of those?
I think, yeah, it went a bit beyond the survey to really say how did you approach different, like, data collection or data skills exercises together with other regulators. But what we do see is that they did use some specific strategies, such as ensuring that, well, even if salaries at a regulator, of course, they may not match the salary. There's other aspects of the work at regulators that can make them more attractive to attract staff. One of them is job stability, but we also see and also highlight in the report quite a few different programs that regulators employ to kind of make them more attractive to different skills in the sector, because I guess especially if salaries aren't competitive, you have to stand out in a different way. And that was their strategies to be able to still recruit significant staff. I think through other work streams, we do also see, of course, regulators engaging together to collect data together, or to create joint programs that would allow them to make use of economies of skill, so that they can kind of fill up that skills gap that they may have as an individual regulator. So yeah, there's definitely different strategies, and some are more on the recruitment side, and to make sure that they still stand out in some way, and others are more about efficiency and how can they work with the skills that they are able to recruit. How can they work collectively to still do their work effectively in that sense.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions among the panelists? Or I don't see anything in the chat. I will directly give the floor to the next panelist, and especially to Annie Brand-Billon, the president of the Network of Economic Regulators and director of Economy, Market and Digital at ARCEP. Will chair this session. So Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everyone. We have a very interesting session, roundtable right now, called Sectoral Insights, where we'll be able to have examples on how regulators adapt to new regulation, new responsibilities, to the evolution of the sectors they regulate, in order to incorporate new stakes. So we'll have presentation by Richard Davies from Ofcom, who will present their data hub and how they are preparing to take on their new responsibilities for oversight of digital platforms. We'll also have a presentation by Maya Bakash from ARCEP, the French telecom regulators, who will give us a presentation on how ARCEP has been able to incorporate the environment issues and practices. And we'll have also a presentation by the Peruvian transport regulator, OSITRAN, who will give us a presentation on their training program and how they adapt it to develop career programs. So Richard, the floor is yours for 10 minutes, please.
Perfect, thank you very much. So just to introduce myself, I'm Richard Davis, the Chief Data Officer for Ofcom. Ofcom has responsibility in the UK for regulating communication sectors, so everything from broadcast, radio spectrum, telecoms, and post. And more recently, we've taken on regulation for video sharing platforms, and there's a bill currently in progress in government looking at online safety, and Ofcom is the regulator that will be regulating this new area. So this is everything from platforms through to search and adult services, and looking to enable us to regulate the platforms so that we can say, do they have the systems and processes in place to protect their users from content that would either be illegal, or for children, content that would be harmful. So as part of this process, we've started to really focus on how we can upscale the technology. And this isn't just for online safety, but also to reflect the changing digital nature of all of the areas that we regulate. So recently set up the Technology, Data and Innovation Group, with the intention of leading on tech-first policy-driven decision-making. So making sure that the technologists are involved in the first instance in discussions with policymakers as we look to involve some of those regulations. This team has grown from 20 to over 80 people currently, with a projected growth of around 120 people, but potentially more as we move forward into the future. What that group is split up in terms of how it's looking to grow is around 4 main areas. The first is tech policy. So this is the interface between the policy teams and the technologists. So say, how do we actually translate some of that technology ask into policy? A comms and media tech group. This is looking at emerging technology, prototyping some of those technologies, and looking to understand the in-depth methodologies that are used within those areas. Trust and safety technology. So this is looking very much at the online safety areas, so the platforms, and what technology can be used in those areas to provide safer experiences. So things like automatic content classification, age verification technology, and digging into generative adversarial network scans as they look to produce deep fakes, and trying to understand how is these techniques being used, how's the technology being used, and where's the risks that generates. The last area is the MILE area, so it's the Data Innovation Hub, and the growth, the area that we're looking to grow within Ofcom to really provide the data and the capabilities across Ofcom, so that we can use data and evidence in our decision making, so no decisions are made without the data and evidence to back it up. In terms of what the team's looking to do, this is looking to enable Ofcom to use data as efficiently, as effectively, and as safely as possible in that decision-making process. And this has been a journey that we've gone on. So in 2019, the hub was originally set up with, at that point, 2 people. It's now currently sitting at around 45 people. And as we move forwards into the next year, looking to grow that to around 80 people. So a large growth. And that's really reflective in terms of the successes that the Data Innovation Hub has had in terms of what it's produced. So that's produced over 20 pilots in advanced analytics techniques, but also getting the data in front of people. But moving forwards, there's a lot more to do in terms of how we're looking to run our data strategy and the senior buy-in that we have for that. The data strategy is then looking to be set up around 4 key areas. I'll give a brief overview and then go into some of those in more detail. So governance, risk and reporting. This is looking at making sure that we've got our data governance in place. So whenever we're using advanced analytics, we have that ethical framework, the privacy framework, to be able to deploy that, but also tracking the benefits that any of the productions have, and making sure that we can track the project deliveries and the costs and the budgets of those, so we're actually able to report on a return on investment from the data asset we're producing. The second area is looking at delivery and workflow. There's a number of data teams within Ofcom, and in the past they've been quite siloed and not working to the same principle. They've been using different technologies, different working practice. One of the key things that we're looking to is build up a community, and as part of that community, get everyone speaking the same language when it comes to data. This is really important so that we can make sure that we're doing things effectively, but also that we can reuse code, we can reuse data, we can reuse some of the effort and make us as efficient as we possibly can. And this part of the group is really looking to set up that method so we can go in to make sure that we're using the same language. The third area is looking at data platforms, and this is really saying, what's our future strategy look like internally? So using the cloud providers to be able to scale up on demand the capability that we have for data and analytics, ensuring that we've got that full data catalog, the data lineage tools to be able to understand what data is being used, what the metadata is behind it, so that they can understand the safety and security principles that are required and who's using the data at any moment, but then providing the tools across the organisation so that analysts are able to use those effectively. And then the last area is people and community, and this really follows on from some of the conversation in the previous talk around how we can actually build the people and the skills and the community of people that are using data and data analytics, especially as we look to scale this up as part of the online safety regime. And how we're doing this in terms of that growth, we can't go and compete with some of the largest tech companies. We don't have the budget, we don't have the capability to do that. So I think there's a different routes that we're looking at as different parts of the organisation. Part of it is say, how do we pull in people at a much earlier stage in their career, so we can then give them the tools, talent, techniques to be able to develop those. So we have an apprenticeship scheme where we've been working with the Bright Network, so really looking to attract people from some of the less representative socio-demographic groups in both the regulator but also in the tech sector as well. We've set up a grad scheme where we have specific data science graduates that are coming in and looking to then train them up into how we can use them in the regulatory space, working to move them around the different regulated areas as they get exposure to a number of those before then rolling off into full-time job. The last bit is then looking at our data profession as a whole. So in this, we've set up a regime with a number of different areas where we're targeting people and trying to encourage them to take on learning. So we have a data literacy program that we're setting up where everyone across the organisation is going to have the base level of data training. And the idea here is that as we're looking to use data effectively, we need to make sure that everyone's able to question that data and the methodologies that are being presented. It's kind of the how to lie with statistics in reverse, so that we can make sure that some of the senior policy analysts are able to question the results that are being put in front of them. The next bit is then looking at targeted learning. So as we recruit people who are lower down their career journey or earlier in their career journey, how do we give them some of the more advanced tools, the advanced techniques, and really take them on training, offering them certifications so that they can actually put those on their CVs and build up their career profile, get them speaking with external organisations and really rolling out some of that. We're also looking at then internal apprentices, where we can take people who have worked in policy areas and offer them data apprenticeships, so that they can learn some of those advanced techniques in their current job and roll out some of those to be able to provide a data driven decision making in their own teams, but with the support and the skills from a central hub. And the last area is then saying, what can we do to make sure we're attracting a group of people who would usually be very difficult for us to provide to attract, whether that's from researchers or people from the tech industry. Some of the things that we're looking at here are secondments, where we have people working 3 days a week in Ofcom, but then 2 days a week in the Alan Turing Institute, for instance, where they can then continue to do more advanced research. It helps us because we're getting some more advanced research in the areas that we're interested in. And some of those might be looking at recommender systems, for instance, or the risk of processes in algorithms. So we can actually use that in our online safety, in the work that we're doing in that area. But it also attracts people from a more research and academic leaning to be able to see how they can continue to research, but then apply their methodologies in a business sense. And then lastly, through the Digital Regulators Collaboration Forum in the UK, which is amongst 4 regulators here, we're looking to see if we can set up opportunities for job swaps and secondments so people can learn from other regulators and share best techniques, methodologies, and look to grow career profiles in that way. So really taking a very holistic view in terms of how we can both get people into that funnel, but how we can train them up to be able to deliver. And that's essential for us as we're looking to use data more effectively, and how we need to use it, as the number of entities that we're about to regulate is going to go up 100-fold from where we were previously.
Thank you very much, Richard. I suggest that we move on to the next presentation, and we'll have a set of questions for all the session, if you don't mind. So, yeah. Maya, please, the floor is yours for 10 minutes too.
Yes, thank you very much. Just trying to share my slides. Just a minute. So are you able to see my slides or not yet?
Yes.
Yes, great. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you how ARCEP actually had an evolving mandate, a new mandate to sustain environmental issues. So as a key introduction, I'd like to make the point that, well, it's a business as usual in a way, because an agile regulator needs to regulate innovative sectors, and that's what we do. We do regulate innovative sectors, so we need to adapt every day to those innovative sectors and to those new innovation. But actually, we had something new to do. We had an evolving mandate, and that means that it's not only about regulating a new sector, because in a sense, we previously, in the past, had to regulate new sectors, for instance, distribution of the press 4 years ago, or other kind of regulations. But this time it's new because it's a new objective, it's a new mandate. How can we focus on digital sustainability at the same time as we focus on innovation in telecommunication industries, on growth, and so on? So this is why it was so challenging to achieve. How can we include this new objective of digital sustainability in all our sets of objectives? So I'll make 3 very short points, of course, today with you, but I hope this discussion will go further. So first, I'd like to highlight the fact that this new mandate was really a new process, and we had to tackle the issue of whether to intervene without or with a legal mandate. And that's a major issue. And we chose to have a pragmatic approach, a kind of bottom-up approach. It started with our staff and our board interested in the environmental issues and challenges. And our staff and our and the people at the board at the time wanted to tackle this issue of environmental sustainability. And even before we had the legal mandate to do so, we did start whole work streams, a whole kind of reports and so on to study this new topic. And then 2 years after, in a sense, we had new legal powers. So it was a pragmatic, but also a sort of back and forth relation between the regulator and the legal setting. So it was a step-by-step approach. I highlighted some of the reports ARCEP did before the legal mandate and since 1918. So that's the first point I'd like to stress. The second point in this process, that it was a very collaborative and open approach. We had workshops and we really tried to include both the staff inside of ARCEP, but also associations and researchers and operators and all stakeholders in this sense. So the second point was more tricky. How can we affect environmental outcomes? Of course, our regulation can have a strong impact on how telecom operators produce and exchange. Our actions can be both direct and also indirect, because, for instance, let me stress the fact that we can give incentives to operators to invest in more green technologies. For instance, we showed that mobile networks would consume up to twice more than fixed networks. So we try to give incentives to operators to invest in fixed networks. And also inside the fixed networks, the choice between copper and fiber is also about green technologies, because we showed that fiber technologies consume up to 4 times less than copper technologies. So our actions, our regulation can have an impact. But we think that it's not only about regulation, it's also about gathering information and sharing this information. So we focused on collecting data, both to orient consumers' choices, but also public policies. Because in this area of environmental sustainability, not so much is known and studied in a way. So we needed, I think in France actually, we needed a neutral expert to gather information and to, in a way, share the consensus, make the consensus emerge on what we know and what needs to be done. So we believe that we try to be this neutral expert that raises awareness among all stakeholders. Then the second point is that we believe that we try to build on our what I can call our relative advantages. Our agile approach was not about only hiring new people that would be expert on environmental outcomes. We tried to build on what we know, and where we are experts in, and that's quantitative analysis, technical knowledge, data analysis, and so on. So we believe that measuring the environmental impact is what we know. I mean, and what was crucial to do, and what we know how to do. And of course, surely that's our relative advantage, but it comes with much complexity because, as you know, regulators are best at doing one single task and pursuing one single objective. And by including environmental outcome in our objectives, we may have balancing issues. We may have complex and opposite objectives to reconcile. And for instance, when it comes to network sharing, it's of course it's better for the environment to share, for instance, antennas and network, but it can be very counterproductive in terms of competition and infrastructure competition. So that's one example of how complex it can be to include a new objective in our regulation. So just show you some slides to show what was done. Actually, in times we tried to measure the environmental impact of ICT in France, for instance, and and we showed how terminals have a major impact on the carbon footprint in the French digital ecosystem, as you can see on this slide. We tried also to measure the impact of the fabrication process compared to the distribution process and the final phase of using the product. And as you can see also here, the fabrication is a major responsible of the carbon footprint. And we did also a survey including all telecom operators, but also we try to include other producers such as data producers in all kinds to achieve a measure, a comprehensive measure of the digital impact. So this is a work in progress, but as you can see, we did some quantitative analysis in there. Finally, if I still have time, looking at the clock, yes. Finally, I'd like to insist that to the fact that we need independent regulators in this mandate of environmental stability. Why? Because we believe that a neutral expert help support trust in this area and support trust in kind of impartial decision. And we try to do so by our collaborative approach and also by informing the debate and giving comprehensive and acceptable and precise information and measures to enlighten the debate. Sure, there's a risk here to give to independent regulators a political objective in a way, and not a technical one. But we do think that now environmental stability is more about technical issues than about political trade-off. And maybe we'll come to that later in our debate. But we believe that we need to include environmental objective in every regulation we have, and not only on the side or in addition to other objectives. So to conclude, we do believe that we need an agile regulator to tackle this new mandate. And what I tried to show you is that we included this new mandate in our regulation by a kind of pragmatic approach. Before even having a legal mandate to do so, we did work and reports on this topic, and then insisted on having this legal mandate to go further in a way in our new mandate and new regulation. Second, we try to build on our relative advantages and not only to consider environment as a new work stream or a new sector to regulate, but really to include the environmental objective in our day-to-day regulation and building on our relative advantages that we believe are the expertise, the work on data, and being a neutral expert was key to converge towards a common and acceptable solution. And of course, just to conclude, we know that the telecom and the digital technologies can be a solution, actually, not only a problem. They can impact positively on the environment. But before addressing the positive impact, we try to do our part, meaning that given the positive impact, can we still reduce the negative impact, and what kind of negative impact can we address? So we are trying to do our part in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Let's now switch to Ricardo Quesada Ore from Ocitran for another experience to share with us.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me share my slides, please. A minute. Okay. Thank you again. It's a pleasure to talk to you on behalf of the Regulatory Agency for Public Use Transportation Infrastructure, Ocitran. We would like to thank you for inviting us to tell you about how we try maintaining agility through keeping staff knowledge up to date and relevant via career development programs. I will try to explain what we've done at Ocitran with the purpose of guaranteeing the right level of training of our workers in a setting with few resources and where the restrictions limit us significantly on this matter. We are convinced that to have an agile regulator that's capable of facing the market change and properly meeting the citizen needs is crucial to have talented human capital, not only talented, but committed. This is a challenge that we're facing in the middle of political and economic crisis, where the public salaries are offered are no longer competitive in contracts with the private sector, and exists a lack of interest of working in the public sector. Let me briefly explain what is Ocitran. Ocitran is a particular economic regulator. Our regulation is based on the concession contract of public-private partnerships. Ocitran has technical, administrative, economic, and financial autonomy. We regulate and supervise public transportation infrastructure such as railways, ports, airports, waterways, and roads that have been granted to the private sector. We regulate the infrastructure, but not the transport service, with the exception of the quality of the service of the Lima Metro line. That includes 32 concession contracts, which represent an investment of about $16,000 billion. Ocitran and the regulatory policy in Peru are just over 25 years old. Its creation coincides with the process of structural reforms that allowed the country to emerge from the greatest economic crisis in its history and become a market economy, in which the state retained its role, becoming an arbitrator and guarantor of fair competition. However, we believe that we have a long way to go to improve, learn, and establish ourselves as a world-class regulator. In that regard, we are facing three main challenges. First, making Ocitran activities known to the general public. Second, becoming trustworthy in the eyes of the citizen. And that is especially difficult because the corruption scandals and political instability of the country have affected the credibility of public institutions. And third, being able to keep a team of committed and qualified professionals. Although, to reach this goal, we have to deal with some restrictions and obstacles. Even though technically the regulator was created as an autonomous institution, in practice our autonomy is limited by the rules the central government puts in place. For instance, when we talk about funds, the regulator budget comes from 1% of the incomes of the regulated enterprises. That means that the regulator doesn't get any funds from the state treasury, but nevertheless, when it's time to use our budget, we must comply with the restrictions set by the central government. Said restrictions are also involved in how the Human Resources Department works, because in order to hire new staff members, the central government must approve them first. As a consequence, there is little flexibility, and this makes it difficult to keep the staff and guarantee their proper training. In Peru, there are different labor regimes in the public sector, and each one offers different wages and work benefits. In the 90s, when the regulator was created, it was assigned to the labor regime of the private sector. This was done with the intention of favoring offering competitive working conditions and recruit the best human capital. The purpose of this hiring style was to update key institutions such as economic regulators, Inland Revenue, and Competition Authority in order to boost the development of the market-based economy. However, only 38% of our staff currently work under the labor regime of the private sector. Over the years, a new regime was created, and this one made it possible to hire workers in the public sector through administrative service contracts. And currently, 62% of Ocitran employees work under that regime. But that regime offers less employment benefits, such as earnings or pensions, in comparison to the previous regime. As a solution to this problem, a new labor regime was created in 2013, an administration-wide project that sought to create an unified employment regime for all public officials. But Ocitran currently applies this new regime only to the president of the board of directors. Consequently, contract salaries and other benefits of Ocitran staff are ruled by three parallel systems that might undermine staff motivation and human resources practices. Since we are not authorized to increase the amount of employees with the private sector regime, in the last years our staff has grown only through hiring under the second regime previously said. So you might ask, how is our staff assembled? Well, 86% of them have at least a bachelor's degree, and 75% of our management team has a master's degree. Also, around 38% of our staff are in their 40s. Besides this, Ocitran has to deal with many restrictions that make funding training programs for our staff very difficult. On one hand, the budget constriction limit our possibilities greatly, and on the other hand, the pandemic affected our income, making us give priority to the institution's basic needs in order to continue working. However, despite all the challenge I've mentioned, our staff turnover has decreased greatly in the last few years, going from 10% in 2019 to 6% in 2022. So under this condition, how are we managing to recruit qualified professionals and provide them with advanced training? First, our extension program to recruit trained staff. This program is aimed at This program is aimed at low economy and engineering students of Peru in their senior year degree. We offer 45 openings each year and receive about 1,000 applications. It is a 200 hours program with a multidisciplinary approach with other expenses paid for the students. More than 650 university students have been part of this program in the last few years, and over 50% of them come from universities out of Lima. This program offers the students the opportunity to increase their level of employability and allows Ocitran the chance to previously train young professionals that can later be hired within our budget constriction. It's worth stressing that when the regulator was created, there wasn't any academic program that addressed topics related to economic regulation or competition policy. So this one of the fields in this kind of in our country. By creating this course, we started to hire interns that would later grow in the institution. Nowadays, 32 of our staff members were part of our extension program, and plenty others found jobs in different companies. Due to the pandemic, the last editions of extension program have been online. However, since an important benefit our program offers is the experience of seeing the ports, metros, and airport operation, we expect to get back to the presential experience in the near future. That brings me to our second approach, and that's the management and talent development model for staff. The main goal of this in-house program is to provide our team with advanced training. But before I get into explain how it works, let me give you a little background information. The first thing that we need to have in mind is that there is a national authority who rules over all human resources issues in public sector. For example, until 2014, OSITRAN could provide their employees with financial aid for master's degrees or PhDs. This is no longer possible unless you change to the new labor regime. The second thing is that all training must be included in a management instrument called the People Development Plan. And that plan is approved annually, and its flexibility to include additional training is very limited. As a consequence, we started in a house training program that works like this. First of all, the Human Resources Department starts with awareness raising workshops between the staff, and then it makes a diagnosis of your training needs. This is part of the strategic training plan to have a well-trained and motivated workforce. Its goal is to engage managers, bosses, and other employees in general. Then the talent and key position matrix is created. This is a tool that identifies the training needs and indicates how and in which positions they need to focus. For example, the digital transformation or the fight against corruption are key issues in OSITRAN strategic planning. Then to this analysis, we could learn that among our staff, especially in management roles, we had many professors from top universities as well as specialists from different fields. So given the lack of budget to fund training for our staff, it was decided to select these qualified professionals and ask them their support. As a result, free training courses were created in 2021, for example, more than 950 employees were part of 35 workshops. And that means that on average, each staff member received 3 training sessions a year. Furthermore, the Human Resources Department increased the possibility of training by funding other free courses that could interest our employees. It's worth mentioning that since the extension program has been done online, we now have a digital platform that has over 200 hours of recorded classes that we can use for our induction plan and in-house self-learning system. So to sum up, this is how we have dealt with all the restrictions we have. Nonetheless, we know it's necessary for the regulators to obtain knowledge from outside our borders, but we would need to be able to finance international programs and international abroad, and that's not possible for us at the moment. To finish up, I'd like to share with you that we are pleased to say that despite all the restrictions, OSITRAN was certified as a great place to work by the Great Place to Work Institute. This reinforces our commitment to keep working through training and updating our staff in order to find the tools that allows us to be an agile regulator and meets the needs of our stakeholders. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, Maya, and Richard for this very interesting presentation. I don't see any question in the chat box. Are there some? Or yes, Eric, please.
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much to all speakers. for those very interesting, I would say, case studies, since they pointed out the importance of the capability to improve the skills of the staff in various ways, and as a way to attract people despite the wage gap. Let's summarize like this. Maya, I have a question to you about the decision of ARCEP to take into account environmental issues in its mandate, while this is not in its mandate. So what was the reaction of the various stakeholders of regulation? Typically, I'm thinking of network regulators, new entrants, network operators, sorry, new entrants, and of course also the public at large. Did they react to this initiative by ARCEP, and of course the public authorities as well, because you mentioned that now the public I mean, ARCEP is in a way to ask for a mandate by the public authority. So could you give us some enlightenment on this?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. Thank you. It was a step-by-step approach. So I believe the response was rather positive, because we started first by doing a small report studying the impact for the future of the usage of terminals. So it was a very small study, and it was interesting because there was nothing there. I mean, we didn't have any previous studies on this topic, so it was an additional information in the debate, and it was positively, appreciated. And then the government asked us for a joint report with another organization, ADEME. And so it was a step-by-step and progressively. I believe that since it was progressive and inclusive, the reception of it was rather positive. We also did a workshop online, because it was during the COVID time, and we had many associations joining this discussion. So yes, I mean, genuinely the reception was positive, and then operators may have been reluctant to share their data. So that's the point where we needed a real legal mandate to be able to collect data from operators. And I think operators themselves are now, conscious of the fact that both their staff and their consumers need them to address this environmental issue. And none of the operators was reluctant to at least to have a positive image regarding environmental sustainability. So I think the reception was positive because of the topic, because we all needed to have a consensus on this topic, and to be, to be able to join the train, and everyone was happy to have a neutral actor giving data and being rather objective about measurement. And if I want to be comprehensive on the issue, we may had negative appreciations from actors saying you are underestimating the positive impact of the digital sector on environment. And you are only focusing on the negative impact. So why are you playing this game in a way? So our answer was, we're not underestimating, we are just doing our share. And of course, it's a very complex issue. There are positive impacts, there are rebound impacts also, and it's very difficult to assess all the impacts and all the effects, but it's a first step, and we are trying to do our share.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? I may have one, maybe. The three of you showed how forward-looking regulators are and how they are able to do it and to be forward-looking under constraints, whether budgetary constraint or other types of constraint, legal constraint. So we had examples of attractive training programs that are provided, or examples of topics that the regulators are able to deal with and to attract. So there is a kind of paradox, because the more forward-looking you show you are, the more interesting training program you develop, the more outside options you provide to the people you have inside your organization. So I was wondering whether you observe that it's not as difficult as it could be to attract people, junior staff, but it's very difficult to keep them inside, because the better you are, the more outside options they have. And once they are trained, I mean, they are not opportunistic, but it's the way life is. The more trained they are, the more outside options they have, and they you don't get a complete return on your investment. Have you observed such things, or is it as difficult to get to attract junior as it is to maintain more senior staff? So maybe I don't know, Richard or Ricardo, who had a point specifically on training and.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about that. I think we're still in growth phase at the moment. We're recruiting new people in. So when it comes to retention, I don't think we've really gone through the cycle where someone would move on so quickly. I myself have come from the banking industry, and I certainly saw that there, where people would get trained up on their technical skills, and very quickly they'd become a lot more marketable and would move on. I think there's a slight difference in terms of where we are, though, that in that case, people were looking for getting the highest salary that they could. And I think the people that we're attracting, they're not coming because of the salary. They don't have the highest salary compared to some of the tech companies, the financial sector, which are other areas it would. So we're really playing on the mission statement that we have. And I think the online safety bill is definitely something that we're able to push as a new, exciting regime where people are seeing that there is a clear issue and something that needs to be done, and want to be involved in that mission as we're looking to set up. And that in itself is attractive as a proposition. I think reminding people of the mission, why they're there, their purpose, and how they're inputting into that is as important to really keep your retention high. So I think there's definitely an area of staff morality that you want to keep there. There's an area of like giving people career progression and opportunities within that space. But the main thing that I think that keeps people is really selling that mission and saying why are you here and how are you adding to society. And I think that seems to help the way that people are looking at when they're staying. And we do surveys, and I think the surveys that I see here, people who are looking for moving jobs in the next 3 to 5 years, is less than 10%, I think it was in our most recent surveys. That seems extremely low compared to what I've seen outside of the regulatory space.
Thank you, Richard. Any other comments on this, Ricardo?
You know, in our case, in Peru, I think it's a little bit complicated because I think it's my opinion. Exists a lack of interest in working in the public sector. For all the environmental, the crisis, economic, the institutional crisis, it's not. The better students, for example, find another options beside the sector, the public sector, no? But the training programs in the public sector are interest, and it's possible to recruit a young professional, but it's difficult to retain or maintaining them, no, because the salaries is frozen since 2006. No, so it's difficult to retain management and middle managers.
Thank you. Are there other questions, comments, reactions to the presentation and the debate? Because I'm looking at the clock. I think we we are running out of time for this first roundtable. So thank you very much to the three presentators for these very interesting presentation and case studies. I now will give the floor to Eric again, or right now, Dominique.
I can take the floor to give the floor to Dominique.
Okay, let's do it like that. Thank you very much, everyone.
So thank you so much, Anne, and thank you so much, the panelists, for your very stimulating first intervention. And now Dominique Jam, who is the president of the Club des Régulateurs and also General Director of the French Regulatory Authority for Energy, will chair the second panel and introduce the speaker. So Dominique, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks very much, Anne, for the very interesting first roundtable. And congratulations to everybody in charge of organizing this workshop. So I have the pleasure to introduce the second roundtable. We have a very, very interesting and diversified and excellent panel. Maybe if I'm allowed a few minutes, so we do them with a few thoughts on this question of agility regarding especially our situation as an energy regulator. Also, as you imagine in Europe, specifically in a specific time of crisis now at the moment, and so very, very involved in the question of agility. So maybe my first thought would be to say that agility is, of course, very good, very important, and you have to adapt yourself. It's obvious you have to readjust your resources, how you manage them, etc., etc., especially in time of crisis at the moment for us. But you also have to keep working on your long-term missions, on your normal missions, on your long-term strategy, because they are still there, and so you cannot just drop them in a few days. For instance, for us as an energy regulator, we are in charge of the regulation of network operators, electricity and gas, and so they are not specifically in crisis. The crisis is on markets and resources, but we have to do that. We also have to deal with the development of renewable energies, which is a long-term goal. We have a lot of people doing that, and you just cannot tell them, well, starting from tomorrow, you will just work on the crisis in the markets, on the supplier in defect, on the scores of end users, industrial or not, without suppliers, for instance, which could be a result of the crisis, etc., etc. So that's the deal you have to do. You have to keep focused, obviously, on your basic missions. I think it's true for every regulator, not only energy regulators, and at the same time, obviously, deal with the crisis that you have at the moment. So that was my first point. A second one is the question of means. Budget. I'm sure you have also this kind of issue. So in France, as an energy regulator, we are on the state budget, which usually is fine because we are able to negotiate some multi-annual trajectories. And for the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years, the government has correctly has been sticking to it. So we have usually not huge issues, but for instance, this year, because it's at the moment, we have new missions. For instance, everybody knows that what we call in France tariff shield, which is some kind of protection of end users regarding the extremely high wholesale prices for energy. And so the government is putting some subsidies for electricity and gas consumers, and subsidies goes not to the end consumers but to suppliers. And obviously somebody has to look at that, to look upon that. And it's a regulator because we know the offers, etc., etc. So for many reasons, it's us. So now we are in the process of saying, okay, you will give us responsibility to oversight on something like tens of billions of euros next year of state budget. So what means do you give us? And now we're on the process in the parliament, because the state budget for next year is now in the parliament, and we are looking at that very, very precisely, because it's just asking for 5 to 10 people. There's not a lot for tens of billions of euros of budget with the subsidies. But anyway, so it's an issue in times of crisis, because you're back with the state negotiating your budget because you have some new missions. Last thought for me, less maybe, I don't know if it's on the scope of this workshop, but anyway, it's less an internal issue, but more on an external constraint. You have to be agile, you have to react to events, you have to make some tough decisions, but agility is not above all, and especially it's not above the law. And as regulators, we have been reminded this truth by the Council of State, because it was in the beginning of this year, we had an urgency with the balancing of electricity networks, and so we decided to change the rule rather quickly in order to protect in the end, it was in order to protect the bill for end consumers. But anyway, everybody was not on okay with that, and the State Council of State, with a fine, it took a decision it annulled. I have
cancelled.
Cancelled, yes, our decision, because we had the balance between the urgency of the decision and our legal obligation to consult users had not been well straightened, and so we should have, even if there was a lot of money in play, we should have taken the time to consult end users as the law provides, as the law says. So it's kind of interesting, because you agility, but okay, but you still have to consult people in certain circumstances of the case. Okay, so I've been maybe already too long, so let's introduce our first speaker, which is the French one. This is the CNIL, very well known in France, because the Commission Nationale Informatique et Liberté, because dealing with LGPD things, and also sanctioning very, very good players like Google and other ones for very publicized cases. So the speaker is Sophie Nerbonne. Sophie, you're Director of Economic Co-Regulations. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to share those comments on agility. And first, perhaps just to make 2 preliminary remarks, because of the specificity of the CNIL, because contrary to other economic regulatory fields, we are not just regulating actors or market conditions, but protecting a fundamental right enshrined in the European Charter. And of course, in doing so, we are naturally interacting with all economic regulators to apply the rules for the protection of personal data in network sectors. You spoke, of course, about the energy, and we have built together with the compliance package on smart grids. I remember a few years ago. E-communication, we are beginning a compliance club on geolocalization, transport. We have not worked with the Peruvian, but dealing with not transport, but infrastructure, so it's different. But we have still a compliance package on connected cars. Finance, of course, we have compliance clubs with the banking and the insurance sectors. And with water, a code of conduct is under process. So speaking about the agility of the CNIL is quite an exciting task, but we have a very short time to do so. So, of course, I just want to say that the main components of agility refer to much more than resources, but we will concentrate on budget and human resources, and it's already a very important aspect, of course. But I just want to add that the strength of the GDPR, is that it provides for the possibility to complement and adjust the practice on several aspects. And so it allows us to remain agile by entrusting the text with very different ways of complementing and clarifying the rules, including in terms of procedures. So it explains that we are using a very large toolbox, as we created Sandbox, for example, but we have very different process and strong governance about how to accompany the economic actors or public ones, and also the repressive action. But let's concentrate first and for this conference on the resource aspect. And as it was said, we are part of the independent authorities and not just an executive branch of the French administration. And we rely only on public funds voted by the parliament. And that's what is done at the moment, very presently. We don't have any funds with fees. So we just have these public funds. And we are very actively involved in the budget discussion with the executive and following very tightly the discussion in front of the parliament. And what we can consider at the moment, and it was said in a very recent report on intelligence artificial done by the Council of State, and in this report, and it said that the CNIL remains one of the most modest data protection regulator, whether reasoning in absolute value or by relating its means to the size of the country. And with the GDPR, we are considering Great Britain having doubled the staff of the ICO. And for us, we would like to be at least half an ICO staff, but it's not yet the case, even if there is a very real budgetary effort in favor of the CNIL, but it is still insufficient. And if we have a small explanation about figures, I would say that at the moment, the budget is about 26 million euros for 2023, and that will be 2 million more than last year. And the staff is increasing with 18 new people to the existing 245 employees. And what has to be said is that we don't need to obtain any approval from the executive before hiring new staff. When I come back to the main findings of the OECD report, and that we are really, in 10 years, we are gaining nearly 70% of employees. So there is clearly an increase of the staff. And there is a very good position taken by the government and the parliament. And it's quite interesting to have a look at the reason for this real effort done, even if we consider that it's not enough. That in front of the parliament, looking at the discussions, what was on the table was the ratio between what the CNIL cost and what is the gain for the state. And it's when the 18 sanction equivalent to 214 million euros paid back to the state budget is important to notice. And even more when the CNIL adopted this year a simplified procedure to accelerate the sanction mechanism put in force. So that will, of course, result in a significant increase in the sums transferred to the state budget. So, of course, that is not the only reason to put on the table to obtain more budget, but it's clearly one aspect. Another aspect is the shared opinion that strengthening resources for security, and when I say security, of course, it's cyber security, foreign interference, and data protection included, is more necessary than ever. And on that part, the CNIL, and I'm not saying that, I'm just noting what was said during the parliamentary session, has a prominent place in the field of cybersecurity in view of the resurgence of cyber attacks targeting not only large companies or hospitals, as we said, we could see, but also public administrations and SMEs, with some data more sensitive than others, like health data, and some public more sensitive too when I speak about minors. And in all those aspects, we are quite involved and active. And also, we have a prominent place in the field of the growing use of artificial intelligence, as we worked already a lot on this aspect with facial recognition, augmented cameras, as I was saying, the budgetary effort is not enough with the perspective of new tasks, and the Conseil d'État, Council of State, pointed out the necessity of a deep transformation of the CNIL, not only, as I was saying, changing scale with regard to the resources, and in particular human resources, but also being not only an authority protecting individuals against a threat, but a regulator helping development by supporting innovation and respecting the fundamental rights of the people concerned. And so being a facilitator of innovation technology at the service of society. And in doing so, there were some solution given by the Council of State, as to change the name to symbolically mark the transformation, to change the structure of the college in introducing specialists in artificial intelligence systems and innovation players, because that's not the case at the moment, and also diversify the profiles of the staff to help the adaptation of the CNIL in the construction of its doctrine. And so that needing a good mixture of between juniors and seniors, permanent and contractual agents. I must say that we encounter also difficulties in recruiting senior profiles, and that of course raises the question of budgetary means. But what is clear is that, as was said in the previous the previous evidence, it's that the purpose of the mission is what is definitively the most important for the employees at the CNIL, and it's something we are working on with developing different tools to equip the actors. So I think I shall stop that for the moment, waiting for the questions.
Thank you very, very much, Sophie. Well, very, very interesting to see that the CNIL is in a very upward trajectory, which is fine, and I hope that you will have all the means you need, and that the state will keep its power. Okay, so thanks very much. So now we go to our second speaker, which is from the CNMC, which is the multi-sector regulator for Spain, from Spain. We work a lot with the energy part of CNMC in CRUX, a lot of interconnections and other common matters. So very happy to welcome you, Vera Sopieña Blanco. You are Presidency Chief of Staff of CNMC, which is a huge regulator compared to CRUX. Please.
Yes. So thank you very much, Dominic, for this introduction, and thank you for setting up this workshop. I'm my special congratulations for the report, for all the ones working hard on the report on equipping agile and autonomous regulators, because especially for, I mean, of course, probably for all regulatory bodies, but especially for ours, where we have this mixed nature and so many different rules applying and constraints, is especially useful to know where others are, so that we can make the appropriate proposals and suggestions to our the executive, which are, and the ministries, which are the ones that finally have to take decisions on these issues, as I will explain and now in my presentation. I'm going to try to share. Please let me know if this goes correctly, because is this fine? Did I share it correctly?
Yes, it is.
Yes, good.
Fantastic. Yes, so okay. So for just in case someone is not familiarized with the Spanish National Competition and Markets Authority, we are integrated authority that was created in 2013, and is together with the Netherlands and Australia, and I think also there's a country in Lithuania also that they have. We have together, we combine competition supervision together with the supervision and regulation of some sectors: electronic and audiovisual communications, energy markets, postal service, postal sector, airport charges, and railway sector. So what happened basically is that when all these bodies were merged in 2013, the CMC inherited the management regime of the competition authority that had been created in 2007. Before 2007, the competition authority was a part of the economy ministry. So basically, the way that the previous competition authority worked was very much the one of a department of a ministry, and all these rules and constraints and the way things are managed come or are inspired by what was previously at the ministerial department. So, and this is something that creates us a few problems, because the other regulatory bodies, energy, telecoms, railway, they were independent authorities very much the way as I think the majority that have been included in the report, because they were public sector, but hiring decisions, they were quite independent. Budget, they received funds from the fees, and they had important budgetary expenditures in which they were completely flexible. So this has had some, a huge challenge for everyone to comply to the new rules, which are different from the ones they had before. So I'm going to describe now three types of restraints we have in our organization of the CMC. First is the human resources constraints, then the organizational constraints, and the budgetary constraints. So basically, we are 502 people, and it's just the issue of being integrated is very difficult for us when we have to answer to a survey. How many people do you have in energy regulator? How many people do you have in railway regulator? How many people do you have in competition authority? Because of course we are divided in these different divisions, but then there are some horizontal services like legal service, human resources management services, cabinet, the president, that are the same for all, that are common to all the divisions. So this means that when before we had 7 presidents, now we have only 1. But then also chief of staff, there were 7, now there's only 1. The general secretary, there were 7, now there's only 1. Again with legal services, and this is it's not easy to work with these restraints when all the hiring decisions depend on the executive. So basically, what we have to do is every year we ask for we have to explain our needs on human resources. They will have to make a proposal to our Ministry of Adscription, that is the Economy Ministry. And then the Economy Ministry has to negotiate with the Treasury and the Executive to have our proposal authorized, which of course is never, is usually not as much as you ask for. Also, the same goes to promotions and careers. If we have some junior positions and we want to promote some of these junior positions to a more senior level, then we have to ask for, or else we wait for the one at the managerial position to leave the authority, or else we need to ask to the executive to create a new level where we can promote some of the junior positions. And all this takes a lot of time. And basically, once we have been authorized a certain position, then we need to wait normally like 1 year, some months from the date you get the approval to the date you published in the official journal. Then you get the applications, then you make all the tests, and then they can join you. This has been particularly difficult in the last months, where, as I've heard from other authorities, we have been assigned new missions and new functions, and not all of them are functions that are normal, that have to do with our normal mission. For example, in this regard, we were given the month of May with the supervision of the bonification of 20 cents for every liter of gasoline that was sold in our gas stations. Then also we have to supervise how companies. I don't know. Probably you don't know this, but in Spain there has been approved a levy on banks and energy companies. There's a prohibition for this levy, or this type of tax, to be rolled out onto consumers, and we need to supervise that, right? Also, there's these are the type of functions that are not really our core business, and we have to set up new procedures, train persons, try to be imaginative in creating technological structures, apps, and we have very good informaticians that are always thinking how to help us do in a simple way these complex functions that they are giving us from the executive. And this has been quite a challenge when we don't have the same agility or the same power to hire new people. So basically, they give us the functions, but then we have, once the functions or the new tasks have been attributed to us, then we have to ask for human resources, and then from there it takes like 1 year or something until these resources are able to work with us. So in the meantime, things get complicated. There's some here. I have some examples of this. Also, it's very interesting from our authority that we have 2 different type of staff. One is our public employees, but they follow the normal labor rules. So these are the ones that positions have to be authorized by the executive, and then we have to set up all the selection procedure, and it takes 1 year and something and a few months. But then we have civil servants. Civil servants are from special professional bodies from the state. There's people that after the studies, they normal university studies, they have to follow some specific exams from specific bodies of the state that takes like around, depends, no, but from 1 to 3, 4 years to study and to be successful. And then these civil servants can move and work in different positions around the public administration, around the Spanish ministries and bodies. Of course, we have to compete with the ministries to hire these civil servants, and it is not easy because we cannot increase their salaries or give better economic advantages for these civil servants. We have to compete in other means that I will go on later on. Sorry, on how we try to do it. So, as regards the organizational constraints, what happens is our structure, how our authorities organized with the different divisions and subdivisions, has to be approved by the executive. And so, for example, in terms of adapting to new challenges or to new ways of doing things, like, for example, our economic intelligence unit, we are not able to create a new subdivision on ourselves and hire new people and get these people to work in the economic intelligence unit. What we have done is that we've created this unit within the competition directorate, and we lure civil servants from other subunits to work in this one. So the potential for growth is very limited, but they are very vocational and they doing really amazing things. But what we would like to do is to create a sub-directorate for this unit so that it has the proper structure. They can have more people working for them, and of course also they achieve this level of intercommunication with with other people from the government, from other sub-directorates, in which they can sign agreements, collaboration agreements, etc. Right now, being a simple unit within a directorate, they can do this type of things. But we're working on with our ministry and the executive to have a new royal decree approved, where we can have a different type of structure that is adapted to our times. The same goes with we don't have a chief economist unit. We cannot create it on ourselves. We need the executive to approve this by a royal decree, which basically means that other ministries also have to get their approval on this, or a subdirectorate in renewable energies. So basically, it's I mean, we of course we're working on these challenges and these tasks and these new areas, but we cannot show this in our structure, and we cannot appoint the manager or the responsible as the chief or the subdirectorate of that specific new business or new way of doing things. Also, as for the yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe you can come to the conclusion because we are a bit late.
Correct. So yes, annual budget. The only thing there to transmit is that when expanding budget, we also need approval. So there's no problem about the quantity. It's okay. We can for the operational costs, but any modification on how we expend that budget needs also an approval. And then very quickly, how with all these constraints, what are the actions we take? It's specifically we have sponsored remote working. We give a lot of flexibility. We give up to 12 days of remote working that people can organize themselves as one. They may come only in the mornings. They can come only 2 weeks. They can come three days a week. So we give full flexibility, and we have switched also to a more result-oriented work culture, where people set their objectives, their plan of work for the year, and then we give flexibility within. And also training actions, digital skills, but also on other areas, what others are doing to facilitate the synergies between the different divisions. And that's it. I think that's the basic strategies we've been adopting. So thank you so much, and sorry for the extra time.
No, just fine. Thanks very much. Very interesting to see how you manage this specific period and what kind of difficulties you have with the state and the general organization. Thanks very much. Maybe we will go back to that later. So now our third speaker, which is Janice Mikkelsons from Latvia, the Public Utility Commissions. So Janice.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting to participate in this forum. It has been very interesting to follow the discussion so far. And I will also try to contribute with some material on how we are dealing with reserve fund for the Public Utilities Commission. So I hope you can see also the slides.
Yes, okay.
Thanks. So first, few basic facts about the regulator. We are a multi-sector regulator responsible for several sectors in energy. It consists of electricity, gas, and district heating. Then there's another department for electronic communications and postal services. And the third sectoral department is concerned with water supply and sewage and waste management, which includes waste disposal as well as deposit packaging, meaning collecting the empty bottles with the deposit, where the politicians decided that the regulator should have some oversight over the monopoly providing that service. As to the independence level, since establishing of the regulator back in 2001, so it's 21 years back, the regulator is of quite high level of independence. There is a board of 5 board members, including the chair, and they are selected by government and appointed by parliament, and there is no submission to any sectoral ministry. The reporting is directly to parliament, and all the decisions can be challenged only in court. Another important aspect of the independence is financing. So there is a fee paid by all service providers. It is currently set at 0.2% of the annual net turnover of regulated services, meaning if the service provider provides some regulated services and some unregulated services, then they have to calculate separately the turnover for the regulated ones, and that is then used for calculating this regulatory fee. It is also fixed in the law as a state duty, and in that way it is quite independent from the political process. It is guaranteed from the legal point of view, but it can be quite volatile if the sectoral indicators fluctuate, and we see very vivid example of that for this year. As to the state duty, it also then constitutes the own resources for regulator's budget. As an independent institution, regulator has its own budget program, the same way as each ministry has its own, or the other independent bodies, and the government cannot intervene in the submitted budget proposal, but of course it is due to parliamentary scrutiny where they can ask questions of how efficient the regulator is and how the resources are spent. And the resources paid into this program for the regulatory funding cannot be used for any other purposes. So in case if there is any excess, it then should be returned to the sector by reducing the effective rate for the fee for the following years. With this model, having the multi-sectoral scope, we had quite good flexibility. If there's some decrease in one sector, there's usually some way to balance it out by other sectors. But we had some problems back in 2016 when there were coincidence of several events. Up to that, we had also railway as a regulated sector. It was then decided in law to transfer it to another regulator, and that reduced the fee revenues. Then we have some downward energy price tendencies back then, and the opening of electricity market for households. All that resulted in a drop in fee revenues, so we had to find out ways how to move forward. By that time, it also appeared to coincide with the period when we had the OECD performance review. So among other variable recommendations, we also received recommendation to revise the fee setting process and to introduce reserve fund for the fee to carry it over from one year to the other. It then took the following year with quite intense discussions with Ministry of Economics, which is responsible for any amendments to the regulatory law, with largest service providers, organizations representing consumers, and associations of employers to discuss what the amendments to the fee system should be. And it all resulted in a draft law, which was submitted to Parliament. By that time, we were quite lucky that the overall political impetus was to do everything to comply with OECD recommendations so that Latvia can join the organization. And we were lucky to get on that wave, and the decision, after all the hard work with discussing and preparation, was quite quickly adopted by Parliament. So since early 2018, we have the specific legal articles in place, and we are able to retain our extra earnings from one year and carry them on to the following year. So the specific legal text, this is the official translation, is quite complicated, but the main idea is that the regulatory fee is paid on the turnover, which is 2 years past. So for 2022, you pay the regulatory fee from the turnover you had in 2020. And over years, since 2018, we have now accumulated some reserve fund And there is this specific paragraph 8 in the section of the law, which says that such reserve fund should not exceed 25% of this respective regulatory turnover. Meaning if it would go above that, then we would be back to the previous scheme that we have to reduce the effective rate for the following year and return the excessive resources to the service providers as a lower regulatory fee in that following year. But we haven't been in that territory yet. How have we done so far? So in the years following 2018, we faced all the restrictions related to pandemics. So where there were less abilities to attend international events and organize them ourselves, we observed quite favorable energy prices for our own expenditures, so we had some savings. And those savings accumulated over these years to form almost something close to the limit set by law, how large the reserve fund could be. And it appears that it was very timely instrument to avoid problems in the following years. So what we have tested now, that this reserve fund acts as a safety belt for regulatory budget and regulatory resource planning. If we know that we will need more resources than we can forecast on the basis of turnover from regulated services, we submit such usage in the next annual budget proposal, and that enables us to use this reserve from the previous years in the year where we have planned for it. On top of that, if we have not planned for it in advance, but we see that there's some drop in actual revenues, for example, the company closes down and there is no subject to pay the regulatory fee anymore, then within that year, we can request the Ministry of Finance to reallocate reserve to cover the planned revenue up to the limit which was approved in the annual budget. So there is no need to discuss that in the Parliament. If it is not exceeding the initially planned expenditures, we can use the reserve to cover up for such shortfalls. What we saw in 2021 was the end of terms for our board members, and according to the law, they should receive some compensation when leaving the board, but we didn't have specific reserve for that or any accumulated resources. So we submitted proposal with our annual budget that will take some part of this reserve fund to cover those compensations when leaving the office. Actually, when 2021 came, we saw that there are many pandemic restrictions and we cannot use up all the resources we had planned to. So we were able to cover those compensations without touching the reserve fund. Moreover, several of the previous board members were elected for the second term and they had to pay significantly lower compensation than we were budgeting for. However, in this year, we see that our regulatory fee is calculated on the basis of turnover back in 2020, which was the lowest turnover for several years because of recession and low energy prices and low demand in most of the sectors. So we see that this reserve fund has allowed us to plan in advance that we will take out significant part of this reserve fund to cover our operations this year. If we would not have had such fund in place, it would be very difficult to face the crisis as we have now, because many, especially energy companies, as well as water supply companies, are now in situations that they have to submit new tariff proposals more frequent to be able to reflect the actual changes in their energy cost. No one could predict such changes in energy costs in advance. So we have more tariff proposals on the table to review, and at least we have sufficient funding and are able to retain and in some positions also to add more people to work with those issues. if we were in the position similar to 2016 when there was no reserve fund, you would most probably had to fire some personnel to be able to operate within the budget, and that would be very hard to combine with the exceeding workload. So we can say that this has really been a safety belt for us to stay in our places, be able to perform our duties, and use this reserve fund to manage through this drop in regulatory turnover related to pandemics. For next year, we see that because of already higher prices in 2021, we will see increase in regulatory fee revenues. So most probably that will help to restore some part of the reserve fund for the next year. And that's most of what I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very, very much, Anis. Very, very interesting. And I don't know if, Eric, you have some questions from participants, or do we have a few minutes left or not?
Well, if you have questions, you can raise your questions, but I'm afraid we are running out of time. But
you just let me not one question. Is it one comment?
Yeah, you have go on, Dominique.
It could be interesting maybe for Marta, because I don't know what she will say, but I'm struck by the very important differences between each of our three stories regarding how the means are determined, the freedom they have to organize themselves, to hire, etc., etc. And I think very, very interesting, very innovative and interesting solution. Every country, every organization has set up, but anyway, it's very, very different. And I don't know, well, we don't really want to have more and more and more European regulations, etc., upon us. But anyway, it's striking to see how much the difference are, how much it's different, and striking to see that the same European regulations and very, very different organization regarding the means of the regulatory bodies. Thanks very much.
Yeah, well, that's the consequence of being an union of 27 sovereign states with their constitution, the organization of the public service, etc., of public administration, etc. So that's exactly the point, and why we need, of course, cooperation among each national agencies, and sometimes maybe some supranational agency, but that's another debate. So. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Thank you, Dominique, for your introductory remarks and concluding comments. And now we'll have Marta Baxter from the Regulatory Policy Division attempting to conclude the very stimulating workshop. And Anna, the floor is Marta. Sorry, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Eric. First of all, thank you to all our speakers and moderators. I think the discussion gave us a very good insights into some of the constraints regulators may face when it comes to their staff and funding arrangements, but also some examples of very practical strategies and good practices in terms of resourcing that can support agility. At first glance, talking about regulators' management of human and financial resources may seem to be quite a technical discussion. But one of the messages that the OECD report that Vincent presented shows is that a regulator's staff and funding can really make or break its performance. And resourcing arrangements can have really big implications for autonomy, for accountability, and as we've seen today, for agility. We talk more and more about agility or being agile, and this is perfectly understandable if we take a step back and witness the profound changes in regulated sectors, the fact that regulators need to respond to these changes, perhaps taking on new roles and meeting new expectations. And I think also from today, we can see how digitalization is one of those sort of mega trends that is driving that change. But we're also seeing regulators being asked to step up to new challenges that they weren't previously focusing on, such as climate change and decarbonisation. Now, it was a Greek philosopher, I think, who said that change is the only constant. So maybe this is nothing new, but I think there is something particular about the pace of change that we are seeing in our economies and societies, and therefore also in the sectors that economic regulators oversee. So it is clear that agility is a characteristic that will remain important in the years ahead. And of course, in the last 2.5 years, with the COVID-19 pandemic, and even more recently with the energy crisis, we've also had a stark reminder of the need for agility to respond quickly to shocks and unexpected events. Today, we've been talking more specifically about organizational agility, in particular how resourcing can support or impede regulators to be agile. In today's presentations, we heard how many regulators are seeing their mandates evolve. We saw that with Ofcom moving to online safety, digital platforms, ARCEP on digital sustainability, and in that, the important role that data and data collection is going to have in meeting these new mandates. So at the UK's Ofcom, we saw how a regulator is reorganising to deliver on its new responsibilities, and sometimes the scale and speed of the recruitment that is needed. I think, Rich, you mentioned going from 2 people in the Data and Innovation Hub in 2019 to 45 today, and soon to be 80. So we can see that a big part of this is bringing in the right skills. And Richard mentioned how Ofcom is trying to compete with big tech for these skills through apprenticeships for underrepresented groups and their grad schemes. And I thought they were really interesting examples that responded to one of Eric's questions at the beginning of the seminar about how can regulators compete to secure these skills. At ARCEP in France, we also heard about another new mandate for the digital sustainability. And I think it was interesting to see that ARCEP, in another facet of agility, was already anticipating those needs and starting reorganizing in a way even before they had the legal mandate. So bringing together staff that were interested in the topic, for example. At Peru's transport regulator, Ausitran, they clearly recognized that staff as their greatest asset is key to agility, and how they need to keep their knowledge and skills up to date, even in a situation of budget constraints or situation where the specific labor regime may not be as competitive with the private sector as it used to be. So I really liked the example of the extension program, again aimed at students. So I thought there was an interesting parallel there with the presentation from Ofcom about the strategy of engaging with candidates early on in their careers or before they even start their careers, as a way of getting the right talent. We also heard about regulators trying to stay agile by finding ways around certain rigidities in the public service rules. So again, Ausitran in their training, for example, leveraging the existing skills and knowledge of its staff and disseminating that throughout the organization at very low, zero cost. We also heard about the effect of rigidities and constraints for Spain CNMC, and about the challenge of timely recruitment to bring on new staff or the ability to change the structure of the organization, which I think is particularly challenging when new functions are being added. So this shows the mismatch that there can sometimes be between the demands that are put on regulators and then the flexibility of the resourcing arrangements. On the other hand, Latvia's PUC point to some mechanisms that might help to support agility, so notably the reserve fund that they established, which has proven its worth, especially given the current context of the energy crisis. And I thought it was also really interesting to hear the intervention by Francis Cunil in today's discussions, because it also highlights the broader relevance of this work on resources. Obviously, the survey that we at the OECD carried out was for economic regulators, but I think it really shows that it's not these concerns and these considerations are not just for economic regulators, but for all public bodies, especially autonomous or independent bodies. I know we're coming towards the end of our time now, so I will wrap up quickly. But to conclude, it's clear that agility is increasingly one of the hallmarks of what makes a world-class regulator. And we really need to make sure that resourcing arrangements are helping rather than hindering this agility, to enable regulators to adapt to new roles and to tackle the challenges of today and tomorrow. And this is also key at a broader level to strengthening trust in public institutions and the regulatory system more broadly. On that note, I would like to thank again all the speakers, our moderators, and our colleagues at the Club de Régulateurs, Dauphine University, especially Eric, Marie-Hélène, Sophie, for all their work, as always, in putting this event together. We look forward to the next event, which should be in April next year, so expect to hear from us closer to the time. And until then, I wish everyone a very, very good afternoon.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you all.